It's almost impossible to wrap your head around the scale of the Second World War. I mean, it completely redrew the map of the world and ended up costing more than 70 million lives. But to really understand that horror, you have to go back. You have to look at the chain of events, the decisions that literally set the world on fire.
And Winston Churchill, man, he put it bluntly. He said the war was marked by crimes so wicked, there's just nothing else in human history that compares. It's a really sobering thought to keep in mind as we dig into how it all even started. So, how do you even begin to explain how the world just plunged into war in 1939? Well, believe it or not, we have to go back to the end of the last major war. Because the seeds of World War II, they were planted in the very peace treaty that was supposed to end World War I.
Okay, so picture it. It's 1919. German delegates show up at the glittering palace of Versailles. They're expecting to, negotiate a peace treaty. But instead, they're basically handed a list of terms and told, sign here. After 4 years of just brutal, bloody war, the Allies weren't really in the mood for compromise. They wanted to make sure this could never, ever happen again.
And the terms? Wow, they were harsh. Germany was stripped of huge chunks of its territory. Its military was gutted, basically reduced to a small police force. And then, the most humiliating part. They were forced to sign something called the War Guilt Clause, officially taking all the blame for the entire war. And that wasn't just symbolic. It was the legal basis for demanding billions in reparations, a debt so massive it was designed to crush the German economy for decades. It wasn't just the Germans who were furious. Even at the time, brilliant people like the economist John Maynard Keynes were sounding the alarm. He basically said this treaty wasn't a path to peace. It was a recipe for another war. It just created this deep, burning resentment that would simmer away for the next 20 years.
So you have that simmering anger, and then you pour gasoline on it in the form of a global economic collapse. As Germany's economy completely fell apart, a new radical voice started to get a lot of attention from a very desperate audience. 6 million. That is a staggering number. By 1933, that's how many people were unemployed in Germany. The Great Depression had brought the country to its knees. People were starving, they were desperate, and they were looking for anyone who could give them an explanation and a scapegoat. And that's where Adolf Hitler comes in. He was an absolutely captivating speaker, and he gave people simple answers and very clear enemies. He raged against the November criminals who signed the armistice, the politicians who signed that shameful treaty, the communists, the Jewish bankers. For a country that was suffering so much, this powerful mix of blame was a message they were ready to hear.
The speed of the Nazi takeover it's truly shocking. In 1930, they're a fringe party. Just 2 years later, they're the biggest party in the German parliament. Hitler then cleverly used the rules of democracy to tear it all down. He becomes chancellor in 1933, and by the next year, he's gotten rid of all his rivals and declared himself the absolute ruler, the Führer.
So, with Germany totally under his thumb, Hitler starts to make good on his promises to make Germany great again. And that meant one thing: systematically destroying the Treaty of Versailles step by step, while the rest of the world just watched.
At the very heart of Hitler's worldview was this one chilling idea: Lebensraum. It's German for living space. And this wasn't just about getting back some lost land. No, this was a brutal, racial ideology that said Germany had a right to conquer Eastern Europe, to enslave or kill the people who live there, the Slavic people, the Jewish people, to make room for Germans.
I mean, just look at the audacity of these moves. First, he just walks out of the League of Nations, the world's international body. Then he flat out announces he's building an air force and starting a military draft, both direct violations of the treaty. Then he marches his troops into the Rhineland, a supposed buffer zone with France. And the response from Britain and France? A few angry letters, but no action. Every single time, Hitler gambled that they would do nothing, and every single time, he was right. This all led to the high point of a policy that became known as appeasement. Hitler started demanding a German-speaking part of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. Britain and France, absolutely desperate to avoid another war, met with him in Munich, and they just gave it to him. The crazy part? The Czechs, whose country was being carved up, weren't even invited to the meeting. So the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, flies home waving this piece of paper, and he famously declares that he has secured peace for our time.
And all across Europe, people breathed this huge collective sigh of relief. It really seemed like war had been avoided.
But not everyone was celebrating. Winston Churchill, who was kind of a political outcast at the time, saw Munich for what it was. Not a victory, but a total and complete surrender. His warning was just bone-chilling, and it turned out to be devastatingly, tragically right. And when war finally came, it was nothing like anyone had ever seen before. Germany had developed this new, terrifying way to attack, and as country after country fell, Britain suddenly realized it was all alone, with the entire future of the free world resting on its shoulders.
This new tactic was called blitzkrieg, lightning war. The idea was actually pretty simple, but it was revolutionary. You use fast-moving tanks and dive bombers to punch a hole right through the enemy's front line, creating total chaos behind them. It wasn't about slowly grinding the enemy down, it was about speed, shock, and causing a rapid collapse. And the results were just unbelievable. In the spring of 1940, Hitler unleashed his blitzkrieg on Western Europe. In just a little over a month, his armies accomplished what the German Empire failed to do in 4 years of World War I. France, the great military power of Europe, had fallen. The Allied armies were shattered. They were pinned against the English Channel. It looked like a total catastrophe. But then, the miracle of Dunkirk happened. A whole fleet of naval warships, plus hundreds of ordinary civilian boats, fishing boats, yachts, you name it, sailed across the Channel under constant air attack and rescued over 338,000 soldiers right off the beaches. The army was saved, but now Britain truly stood alone.
Now, to invade Britain, Germany had to control the skies first. But the odds? Well, just look at them. They were completely stacked against the British. The German Luftwaffe had almost 4 times as many planes as Britain's Royal Air Force. The fate of the entire war was now going to be decided by a handful of young pilots thousands of feet in the air. And yet, somehow, against all odds, the RAF held on. They were helped by a brand new technology called radar, which gave them early warnings of German attacks, and also by a huge German mistake, when they switched from bombing airfields to bombing London. The few, as Churchill called them, won the battle. Hitler had to postpone his invasion of Britain forever.
So, unable to beat Britain, Hitler makes what is probably the most fateful decision of the entire war. He turns his back on the West and looks east, launching the single biggest invasion in all of human history against his own ally, the Soviet Union.
June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa begins. For Hitler, this was the real war. This was a war of annihilation, to destroy communism, to enslave the Slavic people, and to finally get that Lebensraum he was so obsessed with. And at first, the Blitzkrieg worked just as well as it had in France. German tanks cut deep into Russia, capturing millions of Soviet soldiers. But the Soviet Union is just vast. Its reserves of manpower seemed endless. And by December, the German army ground to a halt in the snow and ice, just a few miles from the gates of Moscow. The soldiers were still in summer uniforms, totally unprepared for the brutal Russian winter. And that leaves us with this huge, pivotal question. Right there, in that frozen landscape, had Hitler's greatest gamble, and maybe the entire war, already been lost?